The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the Arlington National Cemetery grounds, painting the white headstones in shades of amber and gold. Commander Sarah Mitchell sat alone on a weathered wooden bench at the edge of Memorial Plaza, her fingers absently tracing the edges of two military medals resting in her palm. The Bronze Star and the Purple Heart felt heavier than they should, their metal cold despite the warmth of the October day. Around her, families and veterans gathered for the annual Veterans Day ceremony, their voices a low murmur against a backdrop of rustling leaves. Sarah had debated coming at all. For 15 years, she'd avoided these events, preferring the quiet solitude of her small apartment in Alexandria to the pomp and circumstance that always seemed to accompany military commemorations. But her therapist, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, had gently insisted that connection might help more than isolation. "You spent a decade and a half carrying this alone, Sarah," Elena had said during their last session, her dark eyes kind but unflinching. "Maybe it's time to let others carry some of that weight with you." Sarah adjusted the collar of her navy blazer, suddenly self-conscious of the service ribbons pinned to her lapel. At 47, she still maintained the rigid posture of her military years, though her auburn hair now showed threads of silver at the temples. The scars from her injuries had faded to thin white lines along her right arm, visible only if you knew to look for them. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. A temporary stage had been erected near the Memorial Amphitheater, decorated with American flags that snapped smartly in the autumn breeze. Veterans of various ages and eras clustered in small groups, comparing stories and trading handshakes. Sarah recognized a few faces from her years of service, but she made no move to join them. Some chapters of your life, she'd learned, were better left closed. A young family walked past her bench, a woman in her 30s holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The child wore a miniature military dress uniform, complete with a tiny garrison cap perched precisely on his head. His mother guided him toward the rows of folding chairs being set up for the ceremony, speaking to him in low, earnest tones. The boy nodded seriously, his small face a portrait of concentration. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the one that always came when she saw military families. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, counting to 4 on the inhale and 8 on the exhale, just as Elena had taught her. The panic attack that had been building at the edges of her consciousness slowly receded. "You okay, ma'am?" A voice broke through her meditation. Sarah opened her eyes to find an elderly veteran standing beside her bench, leaning heavily on a cane. His VFW cap identified him as a Korean War veteran, and his weathered face creased with genuine concern. "I'm fine, thank you," Sarah replied, managing a tight smile. "Just taking a moment before the ceremony." The old man nodded knowingly. "Sometimes these things bring back more than we're ready for, don't they?" He didn't wait for an answer, just patted her shoulder gently before moving on. "Semper Fi, Commander." Sarah watched him go, touched by the brief moment of connection. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe she had isolated herself for too long. She tucked the medals back into her jacket pocket and stood, straightening her blazer and rolling her shoulders back. If she was going to do this, she might as well commit to it. The amphitheater was filling up now, the crowd a diverse tapestry of military and civilian attendees. Sarah chose a seat near the back, away from the main clusters of people, but with a clear view of the stage. From here, she could leave quickly if the emotion became too much, but she could still participate in honoring those who had served. As she settled into her chair, Sarah's mind drifted back to that day in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. 15 years, and she could still smell the dust and cordite, could still hear the urgent radio chatter and the distinctive crack of enemy fire. She'd been leading a convoy escort mission when everything went sideways. An IED had destroyed the lead vehicle, and then the ambush had begun in earnest. Her team had been pinned down for 43 minutes. She remembered checking her watch obsessively, as if tracking time could somehow make it pass faster. For soldiers wounded, including herself. And then there was Lieutenant Marcus Webb, his Humvee overturned and burning, him trapped inside with shattered leg and smoke inhalation already setting in. Sarah had made the decision in seconds. While her team provided covering fire, she'd sprinted across 50 meters of open ground, rounds kicking up dirt around her feet. She'd reached Marcus's vehicle, pulled him from the wreckage, and dragged him to cover. The shrapnel that tore through her arm had been almost incidental compared to the relief of getting him to safety. She'd received the medals for that action, but she'd never felt heroic. She felt terrified and desperate, and incredibly lucky that they'd all made out alive. Marcus had recovered after months of treatment and rehabilitation. She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd left the military, got married, started a family. That knowledge had been enough for her. She didn't need thanks or recognition. She just needed to know that her decision that day had mattered. A woman's voice over the PA system announced that the ceremony would begin in 5 minutes. Sarah shook her head slightly, trying to clear the memories, focus on the present. Elena always said, "The past is fixed. You can only work with now." The crowd began to settle, conversations dying down to respectful silence. The honor guard took their positions by the flags, their movements synchronized with parade ground precision. A military band assembled near the stage, instruments gleaming in the afternoon light. Sarah's gaze wandered over the assembled crowd, taking in the mix of ages and backgrounds. That's when she noticed the boy again, the one in the miniature uniform. He was seated in the third row with his mother, but he wasn't facing forward like everyone else. Instead, he was twisted in his seat, his eyes scanning the crowd behind him with an intensity that seemed unusual for a child his age. Then his eyes locked onto Sarah's, and something unexpected happened. The boy's face transformed, his expression shifting from searching to recognition to something that looked almost like wonder. He leaned over to his mother and whispered urgently, pointing in Sarah's direction. Sarah felt a flutter of unease. She didn't recognize the woman or the boy. There was no reason for them to be looking at her. Maybe she'd imagined it. She broke eye contact and focused instead on the stage, where a Navy chaplain was taking the podium to deliver the opening invocation. But even as she tried to concentrate on the chaplain's words about service and sacrifice, Sarah could feel the weight of someone's gaze on her. When she glanced back toward the third row, the boy was still watching her, and now his mother was too, her hand covering her mouth in what looked like shock or emotion. The invocation ended, and a color guard began the formal presentation of colors. As the flags were marched forward, the entire assembly rose to their feet. Sarah stood with them, her hand automatically moving to her heart for the national anthem that would follow. That's when it happened. In the moment of transition between the presentation of colors and the anthem, when everyone was standing but the music hadn't yet begun, the boy broke free from his mother's grasp. Before anyone could react, he was moving down the aisle and across the gap toward Sarah's row. His mother reached for him, her whispered, "Michael, no," just audible over the general rustle of the crowd. But the boy didn't stop. He moved with purpose, weaving between chairs and startled attendees until he was standing directly in front of Sarah. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. This stern-faced woman in her late 40s and this child who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Sarah saw her own confusion reflected in the faces of those around her. What was this boy doing? Then Michael squared his shoulders, raised a small right hand, and delivered a perfect military salute. Hand at the brow, fingers extended and joined, forearm at a 45-degree angle. His young voice rang out clear and strong in the sudden silence that had fallen over their section of the amphitheater. "Commander, you saved my dad." The word hung in the air like a suspended note. And for Sarah, time seemed to fold in on itself. The memorial amphitheater, the assembled crowd, the flag snapping in the October breeze, all of it faded into background noise as she stared at this child who just saluted her and spoke in words that reopened a chapter she thought permanently closed. "I what?" Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper, hoarse with shock. Her hand, which had been resting at her side, slowly rose to return the salute on pure military instinct, even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. Michael held his salute perfectly, his young face serious and composed despite the commotion beginning to ripple through the crowd around them. His mother had reached him now, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and what Sarah thought might be tears. "Michael, you can't just—" The woman started, but then she looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and her words died. Her own hand came up to her mouth again, and now Sarah could see she was definitely crying. "Oh my God, you're Commander Mitchell. You're actually here." Sarah finally dropped her return salute, and Michael lowered his hand as well, though he continued to stand at attention with remarkable discipline for someone his age. The ceremony had paused. The anthem hadn't begun yet, and an uncertain murmur was spreading through the assembly as people tried to understand what was happening. A ceremony organizer, an army captain in dress uniform, approached quickly. "Is everything all right here? Ma'am, I need to ask this young man to return to his—" "It's fine, Captain," Sarah heard herself saying, though nothing about this felt fine. Her heart was racing, her palms damp with sudden sweat. "Could we have just a moment?" The captain looked uncertain but nodded, stepping back a respectful distance. The mother grabbed her son's shoulder, not roughly but firmly enough to convey that there would be conversations later about protocol and proper behavior. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm Jennifer Webb. This is my son, Michael, and my husband is—" "Marcus Webb," Sarah finished, the pieces finally clicking into place. The recognition hit her like a physical force. She looked down at Michael again, seeing it now, the same determined set to his jaw that Marcus had, the same dark brown eyes that had looked up at her from that smoke-filled Humvee 15 years ago. "You're Marcus's son." "Yes, ma'am," Michael said, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation of someone who'd been taught to speak respectfully to military personnel. "Dad talks about you all the time. He said you ran through bullets to save him. He said you're the reason I have a father." The amphitheater had gone almost completely silent now, though Sarah was barely aware of it. Other attendees had stood up to see what was happening, and more than a few were pulling out phones to record the unexpected moment. The ceremony organizers had moved into a huddle, clearly trying to decide how to proceed. Sarah felt her carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crack. For 15 years, she'd kept this at a distance, had refused to attend reunions or stay in contact with her unit members, had declined interviews and requests to speak about that day. She'd told herself it was because she didn't want to be seen as special, that she'd only done what any good officer would do. But standing here, looking at this boy whose father was alive because of a decision she made in 3 seconds of chaos and terror, Sarah realized the truth was more complicated. She'd stayed away because she was afraid of being seen as a hero when she felt anything but heroic, afraid of examining too closely the fact that her actions had worked when they so easily might not have, afraid of the weight of knowing someone's entire life, someone's family, had hinged on her choice to run toward danger instead of away from it. "Michael," Jennifer said gently, "we should go back to our seats. The ceremony needs to—" "Wait!" The word came out before Sarah could think about it. She looked at Jennifer, saw the woman's red-rimmed eyes and the way she was holding herself with such careful composure. "How is Marcus?" I lost touch with everyone after I left the service." Jennifer's face softened. "He's good. Really good. He's a high school history teacher now. Specializes in military history. Naturally. His leg still bothers him sometimes, especially in cold weather, but he runs marathons. Did one last month, actually." She laughed, a sound mixing joy and residual fear. "Scared me to death, but he said he needed to prove to himself that his body still worked the way he wanted it to." Sarah nodded, absorbing this. Marcus was alive, thriving, living a full life. He had a son who'd been taught to honor military service, who knew enough about what happened that day to recognize Sarah from. "What? Photos? Stories? How did you know it was me?" Sarah asked Michael directly. "How did you recognize me?" The boy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, slightly worn at the edges from handling. He held it up for Sarah to see. It was a picture she'd forgotten existed. Her unit, taken 2 days after that firefight in Helmand. They were all there, dusty and exhausted, but grinning with the manic relief of having survived. Marcus was in the photo, too, his leg in a temporary splint, leaning on her shoulder for support. Someone had written names across the bottom in permanent marker. Helmand Province, 2010, the ones who made it. "Dad keeps this on his desk at home," Michael explained. "He's told me everyone's names, all their stories. But he talks about you the most. He said you were the kind of leader who'd never ask someone to do something you wouldn't do yourself. He said when everyone else was taking cover, you ran toward the fire, Sarah felt something twist in her chest. She'd spent so long trying not to think about that day, trying to minimize it in her own mind. Hearing Marcus had kept it alive, had shared it with his son, had built her up into something larger than life. It was almost unbearable. "I was just doing my job," she managed, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. "No, ma'am," Michael said with surprising firmness. "Dad says heroes always say that. But you saved him. And because you saved him, he met Mom. And because he met Mom, I'm here. So you kind of saved me too, even though I wasn't born yet." The logic was childlike, but irrefutable. Sarah found herself blinking back tears, a sensation she'd trained herself to suppress for years. Around them, the crowd had gone from confused to moved, many people openly crying now at the raw emotion of the exchange. Jennifer stepped closer, her voice dropping to something more private despite the hundreds of witnesses. "Marcus wanted to come today. He tries to make it to the Veterans Day ceremony every year. But he's leading a field trip to the Museum of American History with his students. They're doing a whole unit on modern conflicts. When Michael found out I was bringing him to the ceremony, he made me promise that if he saw you, he could thank you. I didn't think." She gestured helplessly. "I never imagined you'd actually be here." A ceremony organizer approached again, this time a more senior official. A Marine colonel with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons. "Commander Mitchell?" he asked, his voice respectful. "I'm Colonel Davis, the ceremony coordinator. I wonder if I might have a word." Sarah nodded, still feeling off balance. Colonel Davis gestured for them to step slightly away from the immediate crowd. Jennifer and Michael followed, along with the earlier Army captain. "Commander, I apologize for the interruption to the ceremony," Davis said. "But if you're willing, we'd like to acknowledge what just happened here. The story of what you did for Lieutenant Webb. It's exactly the kind of sacrifice and brotherhood we're here to honor today. Would you and the Webb family be willing to share this moment with everyone? To let us honor your service properly?" Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing in front of hundreds of people, of having her story told, of being put on display, everything in her recoiled from it. She'd spent 15 years avoiding exactly this kind of attention. But then she looked at Michael, still standing at a respectful position of attention, despite being just 10 years old. She thought about Marcus, teaching history to high school students, running marathons on a leg that had been shattered, living a full life because she'd made one good decision in a moment of chaos. She thought about Elena's words. Maybe it's time to let others carry some of that weight with you. Colonel Davis waited for Sarah's answer with military patience, his expression neutral, but his eyes kind. Behind them, the assembled crowd had settled into an expectant hush, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The autumn wind had picked up slightly, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of Arlington traffic beyond the cemetery walls. Sarah looked down at Michael again. The boy had relaxed slightly from his rigid attention, but his gaze remained fixed on her with an intensity that reminded her powerfully of his father. In his young face, she could see echoes of that desperate moment in Hellman. Marcus's eyes finding hers through the smoke and flames, the silent plea for help, the absolute trust that she would try. "Okay," Sarah said quietly, the word feeling both monumental and inevitable. "Okay, I'll do it." Colonel Davis nodded with satisfaction. "Thank you, Commander. I think this might be exactly what a lot of people here need to hear." He turned to Jennifer. "Mrs. Webb, would you and your son be comfortable standing with Commander Mitchell while we share the story?" Jennifer looked at her son, who nodded enthusiastically, then back to the colonel. "Yes, sir. Though I should mention, my husband has no idea this is happening. He's going to lose his mind when he finds out." A hint of a smile crossed Davis's weathered face. "We'll make sure someone records it for him. Come on, let's get you all situated." They walked toward the stage together, and Sarah felt every eye in the amphitheater following their progress. Her military training kicked in automatically, shoulders back, chin up, steady stride. But underneath the professional composure, her heart hammered against her ribs. She led soldiers in combat, had made life-and-death decisions under fire, had testified before review boards and faced down superior officers when necessary. None of that had prepared her for this kind of exposure. As they climbed the steps to the stage, Sarah caught sight of other veterans in the crowd. An elderly World War II veteran in a wheelchair, his uniform jacket decorated with ribbons from another era. A young woman, maybe late 20s, with the unmistakable bearing of recent military service and a prosthetic leg visible below her dress uniform trousers. A middle-aged man with a Vietnam veteran's cap, his hands clasped tightly together as he watched. Each face told its own story of service and sacrifice. Colonel Davis moved to the microphone, his voice carrying clearly over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. What we just witnessed was something truly special, a moment that captures the essence of why we're all here today. I've asked Commander Sarah Mitchell, along with Jennifer and Michael Webb, to join me on stage so we can properly honor a story of courage that deserves to be told. He turned to Sarah, gesturing for her to step forward. Commander Mitchell served in the United States Army for 12 years, with multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. In October 2010, she was leading a convoy escort mission in Helmand Province when her unit came under attack. What happened next? He paused, looking at her. Commander, would you be willing to tell us in your own words? Sarah approached the microphone, her mouth dry. The sea of faces before her swam slightly, and she had to blink to bring them into focus. For a moment, panic clawed at her throat, but then she felt a small hand slip into hers. Michael had stepped up beside her, his young face serious but supportive. I'm not much for speeches, Sarah began, her voice rough. I've spent a lot of years trying to avoid talking about that day, if I'm being honest. But standing here now, looking at this boy who wouldn't exist if things had gone differently, she had to pause, collecting herself. I think maybe it's time to stop running from it. She took a breath and let the memory come fully, stopped fighting against it for the first time in years. October 15, 2010. We were running escort for a convoy carrying supplies to Forward Operating Base Jackson. 7 vehicles, 23 personnel. I was in the 3rd vehicle. The day was clear. I remember thinking how beautiful the Hindu Kush looked in the morning light, which seemed strange to think about now. The crowd was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as the story unfolded. The IED hit our lead vehicle at 0847 hours. The blast flipped the Humvee completely. Before we could react, we were taking fire from 3 directions, a coordinated ambush. We returned fire and tried to establish a defensive perimeter, but we were in a kill zone, not good ground. She could see it all again with crystalline clarity. The dust and smoke, the crack of AK-47 fire, the screaming of wounded soldiers, the acrid smell of burning fuel and electrical systems. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was in the overturned vehicle. We could see it was on fire. His gunner had been thrown clear, but Marcus was trapped inside with shattered leg. We tried to get to him, but the enemy fire was too intense. Every time someone moved toward the wreck, rounds would kick up all around them. Jennifer's hand had come up to cover her mouth again, even though she must have heard this story before. Michael squeezed Sarah's hand tighter, and she squeezed back, drawing strength from a connection. I made a decision, Sarah said simply. I ordered my team to provide suppressing fire, and I went for him. It was 50 meters of open ground. I remember my sergeant, Carlos Rodriguez, yelling at me that I was going to get myself killed. He wasn't wrong. It was a stupid tactical move. But Marcus was dying in that vehicle, and I couldn't just watch it happen. She paused, looking out at the crowd. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't being heroic. I was terrified. The whole time I was running, all I could think was, this is it. This is how I die. But sometimes you just move. You don't think, you just do what needs to be done. You reached him, Colonel Davis prompted gently. I reached him, Sarah confirmed. The Humvee was on its side, flames coming from the engine compartment. Marcus was conscious but barely. Smoke inhalation. Severe trauma. I had to pull him through the gunner's hatch. He was trying to help, but his leg was shattered. I remember him saying, just leave me. Just get out of here. Like I was going to do that. A few laughs rippled through the crowd, tension breaking. Sarah felt her lips quirk in something that might have been a smile. I got him out, and we started back toward cover. That's when I got hit. Shrapnel from an RPG that struck behind us. Tore up my right arm pretty good. But we made it back to the line, and my team dragged us both to safety. She held up her right arm, where the scars were visible. 6 hours of surgery to put it back together. Marcus had it worse. Multiple surgeries on his leg. Months of rehabilitation. But he made it. We all made it out of there somehow. And that's where the story would have ended for me, Sarah continued, her voice dropping. I got my medals, finished my tour, and came home. I left the service a few years later and tried to put it all behind me. I didn't keep in touch with my unit. I didn't attend reunions. I told myself it was because I didn't need recognition, that I'd just done my job. But the truth is, I was afraid to look too closely at it. Afraid of how easily it could have gone wrong. Afraid of the weight of knowing that my decision had life or death consequences. She looked down at Michael, then at Jennifer. I didn't know Marcus had gotten married. I didn't know he had a son. I didn't know he'd built this whole beautiful life. And when this boy walked up to me today and saluted me and told me I saved his dad, her voice broke slightly. It was the first time I really understood what that day meant. Not just that Marcus survived, but what that survival made possible. A marriage, a child, a career teaching young people about history and service. All of it connected to one decision made in 3 seconds of chaos. Colonel Davis stepped forward again, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Commander Mitchell received the Bronze Star of Valor and the Purple Heart for her actions that day. But I think what we're seeing here is something that no medal can fully capture. The ripple effects of courage, the way one moment of selflessness can change not just one life, but generations of lives. He turned to address the full crowd. How many of us here have similar stories? How many of us are alive because of someone else's courage? How many families exist because of a decision someone made to help, to serve, to sacrifice? This is what we honor on Veterans Day. Not just the moments of heroism, but the lives that grow from them. The children who have parents because someone refused to leave a fellow soldier behind. The grandchildren who will never meet the veteran whose actions made their existence possible, but who carry that legacy forward nonetheless. The crowd erupted in applause, many people standing. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the response, by the emotion visible on so many faces. This was what she'd been avoiding, this collective recognition, this weight of expectation and honor. But standing here with Michael's hand in hers, watching Jennifer wipe tears from her eyes, Sarah realized something had shifted inside her. For 15 years, she'd carried the memory of that day alone, had treated it like a burden too heavy to share. But maybe Elena had been right. Maybe the weight didn't disappear when you carried it alone. It just became more isolating. Here, surrounded by people who understood service and sacrifice, who had their own stories of courage and loss, the burden felt somehow lighter. Colonel Davis was speaking again, but Sarah only caught fragments of it, her attention drawn to the faces in the crowd. That young woman with the prosthetic leg was crying openly now, and the elderly man beside her had his arm around her shoulders. The World War II veteran in the wheelchair had his hand raised in a shaky salute. A group of current service members in their dress uniforms stood at attention, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the moment. Then Sarah noticed something that made her breath catch. Throughout the amphitheater, more people were standing, veterans and civilians alike, rising to their feet, not in planned coordination, but in a spontaneous wave of respect. Within moments, the entire assembly was standing, and the applause continued, growing rather than fading. The ovation continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes. Sarah stood at the microphone, overwhelmed and uncertain how to respond to such an outpouring of emotion. Finally, Colonel Davis stepped forward again, gently raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you all. Now, I believe we have a ceremony to continue, but first," he turned to Sarah. "Commander, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. And thank you for reminding us all why we're here today." Sarah managed a nod, not trusting her voice. Jennifer stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Sarah in an embrace that caught her off guard. For a moment, Sarah stood rigid, unused to such physical expressions of emotion. Then, slowly, she returned the hug, feeling something crumble inside her, some wall she'd built that had been keeping her separate from the world. "Marcus needs to know you're here," Jennifer whispered in her ear. "Please, can we exchange numbers? He'll want to see you. He's tried to find you over the years, but you were hiding," Sarah finished quietly. "I know. I'm sorry." Jennifer pulled back, her hand still on Sarah's shoulders. "Don't apologize. Everyone processes trauma differently. But please, don't hide anymore. You have people who care about you, who want to support you. We're not going to let you disappear again." Before Sarah could respond, Michael tugged on her jacket. "Commander Mitchell, can I ask you something?" Sarah knelt down to his level, bringing their eyes to the same height. "Of course, Michael. What is it?" The boy's face was serious, his dark eyes searching hers. "Were you scared? When you ran to save my dad, were you really scared?" It was such a simple question, asked with a directness only a child could manage. Sarah thought about giving him a sanitized answer, something appropriately heroic. But looking at his earnest face, she decided he deserved the truth. "Yes," she said simply. "I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. The whole time I was running, my brain was screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to find cover. Fear is a normal response to danger. It's what keeps us alive most of the time." "Then how did you do it?" Michael asked. "How did you run anyway?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, really thinking about it. "Because someone I was responsible for needed help. Because leaving him there would have meant living with that choice for the rest of my life. And honestly, Michael, because I didn't let myself think about it too much. Sometimes you just have to move forward and deal with the fear while you're moving, not before." The boy nodded slowly, processing this. "Dad says fear and courage aren't opposites. He says courage is being scared but doing the right thing anyway." "Your dad is a smart man," Sarah said, feeling a smile touch her lips. "You should listen to him." "I will," Michael promised. Then, with sudden enthusiasm, "Can you come to dinner at our house? Dad's going to want to hear all about this. And Mom makes really good lasagna. She makes it every year on Veterans Day because it was the first meal Dad had when he got home from Afghanistan." Sarah glanced up at Jennifer, who was nodding encouragingly. "You're absolutely invited. In fact, I insist. Marcus will never forgive me if I let you slip away again." Yes," Sarah heard herself saying. "I like that. I'd like to see Marcus again, to catch up properly." They exchanged phone numbers, and Jennifer promised to text her the address in time. As they prepared to leave the stage, Colonel Davis approached once more. "Commander, if you're willing to stay for the rest of the ceremony, we'd be honored to have you participate in the wreath laying," he said. "It's traditionally done by representatives from each service branch, but I think you've more than earned the right to stand with them." Sarah wanted to refuse. It felt like too much attention, too much ceremony. But she thought about Elena's words again, about connection and sharing the weight. And she thought about all the veterans in the crowd, each carrying their own stories, their own burdens. Maybe by standing up there, she could help carry some of their weight too. "I'll stay," she agreed. The ceremony continued with a renewed sense of purpose and emotion. The anthem was sung with particular passion, voices cracking on the high notes but strong in their collective determination. The guest speaker, a retired Army general, delivered remarks that touched on sacrifice, remembrance, and the bonds that tie veterans together across generations and conflicts. When the time came for the wreath laying, Sarah walked forward with representatives from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. As they placed a large ceremonial wreath at the base of the memorial, Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down. All the lives lost, all the families changed, all the sacrifices made by people who would never be recognized individually, but whose collective service had shaped the nation. After the ceremony concluded, Sarah was approached by dozens of people. Veterans wanted to share their own stories. Civilians wanted to thank her. Young service members seeking advice and perspective. She felt awkward at first and used to so much attention. But gradually, as she listened to their stories and shared brief moments of connection, something in her began to shift. An older woman, probably in her 70s, approached with tears streaming down her face. "My son was killed in Iraq in 2007, she said, her voice shaking. He was helping evacuate wounded soldiers when his vehicle was hit by an IED. Hearing your story today, it helps me understand why he did what he did, why he didn't just think of his own safety. Thank you for helping me see him more clearly. Sarah took the woman's hands in hers, feeling the weight of the grief and pride mixed together. Your son was a hero. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was doing what you did, the woman said, running toward danger to help someone else. And knowing that there are people like you who did the same thing and came home, it helps. It doesn't take the pain away, but it helps. These exchanges happen again and again, each person carrying their own connection to military service, their own stories of loss and survival and sacrifice. Sarah realized that by sharing her story, she'd open a door for others to share theirs. The isolation she'd felt for so long wasn't necessary. There were countless people who understood, who carried similar burdens, who could help shoulder the weight. When the crowds finally began to thin, Sarah found herself standing with Jennifer and Michael again. The afternoon had stretched into early evening, the October sun hanging low on the horizon and painting the cemetery in shades of gold and crimson. "Dad's going to be home in about an hour," Jennifer said, checking her phone. "He just texted that the field trip went well and he's on his way back. He has no idea what's waiting for him." She smiled, a mix of mischief and emotion. "Would you like to follow us home? I know it's last minute, but—" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, I want to be there when he finds out." They walked together toward the parking lot, Michael chattering excitedly about what his dad's reaction would be. Sarah felt lighter than she had in years, as if some fundamental burden had been lifted. She thought about calling Elena later, telling her about what had happened, how right she'd been about the value of connection. As they reached their cars, a young man in Marine dress blues approached, looking nervous. "Commander Mitchell? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask. My unit is deploying to the Middle East in 3 months. It's my first deployment. Do you have any advice?" Sarah looked at this young Marine, probably no more than 22 or 23, and saw herself at that age, confident on the surface but uncertain underneath, trying to figure out how to be brave when everything was terrifying. "Take care of your people," she said simply. "Make decisions based on what's right, not what's easy. Be honest about your fears, with yourself and with those you trust. And remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." She paused. "And when you come home, don't isolate yourself. Stay connected to your unit, to your family, to your community. The weight of service is easier to carry when you're not carrying it alone." The Marine nodded seriously, clearly taking the words to heart. He saluted, and Sarah returned it crisply. "Semper Fi, Commander." "Semper Fi, Marine. Stay safe out there." As the young man walked away, Jennifer smiled at Sarah. "You're good at that. Giving advice, connecting with people. Have you ever thought about working with veterans? I know there are organizations always looking for mentors, people who've been through it and can help others navigate the transition." The suggestion caught Sarah off guard. She'd been working as a logistics consultant since leaving the military, a job that used her organizational skills but felt disconnected from her past. The idea of actively engaging with the veteran community, of using her experiences to help others, had never occurred to her. I don't know," she said slowly. "I've spent so long trying to move away from all of this." "Maybe that's a problem," Jennifer suggested gently. "Maybe moving away isn't what you needed. Maybe what you needed was to move through it, to integrate it into who you are now rather than trying to leave behind." They reached the cars, Jennifer's practical minivan and Sarah's sensible sedan parked near each other. Michael was already in the minivan, visible through the window, doing something on a tablet. Jennifer gave Sarah the address and directions, making her promise again that she was coming. "Marcus is going to cry," Jennifer warned. "Just so you know, he's gotten more emotional as he's gotten older, and this is going to completely overwhelm him in the best possible way." "I think I might cry too," Sarah admitted. "Fair warning." She followed the Webb's minivan out of the cemetery, through the Arlington streets as the autumn evening deepened around them. The route took them into a suburban neighborhood of neat houses with well-maintained yards. The kind of area where kids played street hockey and neighbors knew each other's names. Jennifer pulled into the driveway of a two-story colonial with blue shutters and a porch decorated with fall mums. Sarah parked on the street and took a deep breath before getting out of her car. Through the large front window, she could see a warm, lived-in interior, family photos on the walls, comfortable furniture, the glow of lamps creating a welcoming atmosphere. Michael burst out of the minivan and ran to Sarah's car. "Come on. Dad's not home yet, but Mom wants to show you some stuff before he gets here." Inside, the house smelled like lasagna and garlic bread. Jennifer had clearly planned this meal in advance, Veterans Day being a tradition in their family. The walls were decorated with family photos, including several of Marcus in his military uniform from various stages of his career. Sarah found herself drawn to these images, seeing how he'd aged, how he'd transitioned from soldier to civilian to family man. One photo in particular caught her attention. Marcus on what looked like his wedding day. In dress blues, Jennifer beautiful beside him in a white dress. He was standing without assistance, though Sarah noticed a cane leaning against his chair in the background. The joy on both their faces was unmistakable. That was 2013, Jennifer said, coming to stand beside her. 3 years after Helmand. Marcus was still doing physical therapy, still figuring out his new normal. But he proposed anyway, said he'd already waited long enough to start living his life fully. I'd been his nurse during part of his recovery. That's how we met. Very romantic. Falling in love while helping someone learn to walk again. Her tone was wry but affectionate. She guided Sarah to a study off the main living room. Marcus's desk dominated the space, covered with neat stacks of papers and history books. And there, in a prominent position, was the photo Michael had shown her earlier, the unit photo from Helmand. But there were other photos too, a whole collection of images from that deployment. "He visits your unit's memorial page online sometimes," Jennifer said quietly. "He stayed in touch with several guys from your team over the years. Carlos Rodriguez, your sergeant, he and Marcus still text every few weeks. And every year on October 15th, Marcus takes the day off work. He doesn't make a big deal about it. But I know what he's doing. He's remembering. He's honoring what happened and the people who saved him." Sarah felt her throat tighten. While she'd been isolating herself, trying to forget, Marcus had been honoring that day, staying connected to the people they'd served with. "I cut everyone off," she said. "I told myself it was healthier to move on, but maybe I was just being a coward. Or maybe you were doing what you needed to do at the time," Jennifer countered. "Trauma affects everyone differently. There's no right or wrong way to process it. But Sarah," she turned to face her directly, "you're not alone anymore. You have us, and I guarantee you still have your unit brothers and sisters who would welcome you back with open arms. You don't have to carry this by yourself." The sound of the car in the driveway made them both freeze. Michael came running down the stairs where he'd been changing out of his uniform. "Dad's home. Dad's home." "Okay," Jennifer said, suddenly nervous. "Okay, let's do this. Sarah, why don't you wait in here? Michael and I will bring him in." Sarah's heart was racing as she heard the front door open, heard Marcus's voice calling out, "Something smells amazing. Is that the Veterans Day lasagna? Best tradition ever." His voice was deeper than she remembered, mature by years and experience, but unmistakably him. "Dad, Dad." Michael's excited voice carried clearly. "Something happened today. Something really cool." "Oh, yeah." Marcus sounded amused and indulgent. "Did you get to see the jets fly over? I'm sorry I missed it." "Better than jets, Dad. Way better. Mom, should I tell him?" "Let's show him," Jennifer suggested. "Sarah's here to visit." There was a brief pause, and Sarah could almost see Marcus's confusion. "Sarah? Sarah who? Do I know?" His words cut off as Jennifer led him to the study doorway. Sarah turned from where she'd been standing by his desk, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Marcus Webb had aged well. His hair showed gray at the temples, and his face had the weathered look of someone who'd been through hardship and come out stronger. He'd filled out a bit from his military lean, looking healthy and solid, but it was his eyes that Sarah recognized instantly. Those same dark eyes that had looked up at her through smoke and flames, that had held trust and hope even in the worst moment of his life. "Commander Mitchell?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Is it really, Sarah?" "Hi, Marcus," she managed, her own voice unsteady. "It's been a while." For a moment, Marcus just stood there, swaying slightly. Then, with no warning, he crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled her into a fierce embrace. Sarah felt him shaking, felt the wetness of tears against her shoulder. "You're here," he kept saying. "You're actually here. I've tried to find you so many times. I wanted to thank you properly. I wanted you to meet my family. I wanted—" He pulled back, looking at her face as if afraid she might disappear. "I wanted you to know that I'm okay, that what you did mattered, that it wasn't just my life you saved, it was all of this." He gestured around at his home, at his family. "Everything I have, everyone I love, it exists because you ran through enemy fire for me. I couldn't leave you," Sarah said simply, tears streaming down her face now. "I couldn't just watch you die." "I know," Marcus said. "I know you couldn't. That's exactly why you were the best CO I ever had. You always put your people first." He wiped at his eyes, not bothering to hide his emotion. "Tell me everything. Where have you been? What have you been doing? Are you okay? Are you happy?" They sat down, Marcus, Sarah, Jennifer, and Michael, and talked for hours. The lasagna came out of the oven, and they ate together around a dining room table, sharing stories and memories. Marcus told her about his journey after Hellman, the long recovery, meeting Jennifer, leaving the military, finding his passion for teaching. "The kids need to understand what service means," he explained. "Not just the glory or the patriotism, but the real human cost of it, the sacrifices people make, the way military families give up so much. And they need to know about the bonds that form, how people look out for each other, how strangers become family when everything goes wrong." Sarah told him about her own journey, the quiet isolation of her post-military years, the therapy sessions with Dr. Elena, the struggle to reconcile who she'd been as a soldier with who she was trying to become as a civilian. She told him about what had happened at the ceremony, about Michael's salute, about the wall that had crumbled inside her when she finally stopped running from her past. "I think I've been afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that if I really looked at that day, I'd see how easily it could have gone wrong. How one different decision, 1 second of hesitation, and you'd be dead. And then I have to live with that knowledge, that understanding of how fragile everything is." "But you didn't hesitate," Marcus pointed out gently. "You made the right call, and it worked. You can play, what if forever, Sarah, but at the end of the day, you saved my life. You gave me all of this." He reached across the table and took Jennifer's hand. "You gave me her. You gave me him." He smiled at Michael. "You gave me 15 years I wouldn't have had otherwise, and however many more I get from here on out. That's not fragile. That's real. That's solid. That's what matters." Later, after dinner had been cleared and Michael had gone upstairs to do homework, the 3 adults sat in the living room with coffee. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The neighborhood quiet except for the occasional passing car. "I heard from Carlos Rodriguez last month," Marcus said. "He's living in Texas now, working as a police officer. Still married to the same woman. They have 3 kids. He asks about you sometimes. Wonders if you're doing okay." "I'd like to talk to him," Sarah said, surprising herself. "To all of them, really. I've been gone for too long." "There's a unit reunion coming up in 6 months," Marcus told her, "in Virginia Beach. A lot of the guys from our deployment are planning to be there. You should come. They'd love to see you." Sarah thought about it, about facing all those people she'd cut off, about opening herself up to those connections again. The old instinct to refuse, to maintain her isolation, rose up briefly, but she pushed it aside. "I'll be there," she promised. "I think it's time I stop hiding." As the evening wound down and Sarah prepared to leave, Jennifer pulled her aside. "Thank you for coming tonight. You've given Marcus something he's needed for a long time, the chance to thank you in person, to show you that he's okay. But you've given yourself something too, I think." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "Permission to be human," Jennifer said. Permission to accept that what you did was extraordinary, that it deserves to be honored, and that you don't have to carry the weight of it alone anymore. You have people who care about you, who want to support you, who understand what you've been through. Let us help. At the front door, Marcus walked Sarah to her car. The October night was crisp and clear, stars visible despite the suburban light pollution. They stood in the driveway, neither quite ready for the goodbye. I was serious about staying in touch, Marcus said. I'm not letting you disappear again. Jennifer's already planning to have you over for Thanksgiving. Just so you know, fair warning, her family is loud and there are a lot of them. Sarah laughed, the sound feeling good and natural. I'd like that. I'd like all of this. The connection, the friendship being part of your life. I've missed it, missed having people who understand. Then don't miss it anymore, Marcus said simply. He pulled her into another hug, this one less desperate, more comfortable. You saved my life, Sarah. The least I can do is make sure you're living yours fully, too. Deal. Deal, she agreed, driving home through quiet streets. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, a sense of peace. The weight of that day in Hellman hadn't disappeared, probably never would, but it felt different now, shared among people who understood, integrated into a larger story of survival and growth and connection. When she got home, she immediately called Dr. Elena, even though it was late. Elena answered on the third ring, her voice slightly sleepy but concerned. Sarah, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Sarah assured her. Better than fine, actually. I just wanted to let you know you were right. About connection, about sharing the weight, about all of it. I went to ceremony today, and Elena, everything changed. She told her therapist the whole story, from Michael's salute to dinner with Marcus's family, feeling the words pour out in a way they never had before. When she finished, Elena was quiet for a moment. I'm so proud of you, Sarah, she finally said, her voice warm. This is exactly the kind of breakthrough we've been working toward. How do you feel? Sarah thought about it carefully. Lighter, she said, like I've been carrying this enormous weight by myself, and now other people are helping to hold it up. It's still heavy, but it's manageable now. And I think... She paused, finding the right words. I think I'm ready to stop just surviving and start actually living again. That's beautiful, Elena said, and it's exactly where I hoped you'd eventually get to. We'll talk more about this in our session on Wednesday, but Sarah, thank you for taking the risk. Thank you for being brave enough to show up today. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment, but the silence felt different now. Not lonely, but peaceful. She pulled out her phone and looked at the contact information Jennifer had given her, Marcus's number included. She also found herself opening a web browser and searching for her old unit's contact information. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd reach out to Carlos and to the others. She'd start rebuilding the connections she'd severed, start letting people back in. She'd accept the dinner invitation for Thanksgiving, would mark the unit reunion on her calendar, would say yes to the life that had been waiting for her all along. She thought about that young Marine at the cemetery, deploying in 3 months, scared but trying to be brave. She thought about Michael, learning about service and sacrifice through his father's stories. She thought about all the veterans she'd met today, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories. And she thought about Marcus, alive and teaching and loving his family, running marathons on a leg that had been shattered, living fully despite the trauma, because of someone's decision to not give up on him. Sarah had spent 15 years trying to minimize what she'd done that day, try and make it smaller in her own mind. But standing here now, on the other side of fear and isolation, she finally understood. It wasn't about whether she'd been heroic or just doing her job. It wasn't about the medals or the recognition. It was about the choice to move forward when everything in her screamed to stop. The choice to care more about someone else's life than her own safety. The choice to trust that action was better than paralysis, even when the outcome was uncertain. And it was about making a different kind of choice now. The choice to stop hiding, to reconnect, to carry the weight of her experiences not as a burden, but as a bridge to others who understood. Sarah looked at the medals she'd taken out that morning, still sitting on her coffee table. She picked them up, feeling their familiar weight. Then, Instead of putting them away in their box as she usually did, she found a small display case in her closet, one she'd been given years ago but had never used. She arranged the medals carefully inside it, then placed the case on her bookshelf where she'd see it every day, not as a shrine or a way to live in the past, but as a reminder who she'd been, what she'd done, and how that moment of courage had rippled forward through time to create lives and families and futures. A reminder that she wasn't defined by her trauma, but she wasn't separate from it either. It was part of her story, part of what had shaped her into the person she was becoming. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Thank you for tonight. You have no idea what it meant to Marcus. To all of us. Sleep well and we'll talk soon. P.S. Michael says you have to come to his school's Veterans Day assembly next year. He's already planning to introduce you as the hero who saved my dad. Fair warning." Sarah smiled at the message and typed back, "I'll be there, and thank you for everything, for not letting me run away this time." She set the phone down and looked around her apartment. It was the same space it had been that morning. Same furniture, same walls, same quiet. But somehow it felt different, filled with possibility instead of just silence. Outside her window, the lights of Alexandria glowed in the darkness, the city settling into its Monday evening routine. Somewhere in that sprawl of homes and buildings were other veterans, other stories, other people carrying their own weights and fighting their own battles with memory and meaning. Sarah understood now that she was part of that larger community, connected by shared experience and mutual understanding. She wasn't alone, had never been alone, even when she'd isolated herself. The connections had always been there, waiting for her to be ready to reach out and grasp them again. Tomorrow, she'd call Carlos. She'd start planning for the reunion. She'd look into Jennifer's suggestion about veteran mentorship programs. She'd take all the small steps that would lead her back into the world, back into connection and community and purpose. But tonight, she'd simply sit with this new feeling of peace, this understanding that healing wasn't about forgetting or minimizing, but about integrating and sharing and moving forward. The weight she'd carried for 15 years was still there, but now, finally, she wasn't carrying it alone, and that made all the difference.